All right, for more on the Trump transition, let's bring in our political panel. With us today is Cornerstone Public Affairs Principal Lauren Tomlinson and ARC Initiative Senior Advisor Tim Hogan. Thank you both for being here. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
So obviously the plans have changed quite a lot in terms of what the inauguration will look like, but we are seeing folks out on the Mall and around D.C. getting ready to celebrate. You know, the picture is a lot different for Trump heading into office now than it was in 2017. Our Fox News polling shows that his favorability is at 50% compared to 42% in 2017. I want to ask you as the Democrat here, what do you attribute that to, Tim?
I think it is a different time. We've lived through an era of the first Trump administration where I think when he won the first time, it was such a shock to the system. And there was a lot of talk about how this is not normal. And that was the framing of the beginning of his previous administration. And there were a lot of questions about election interference. Those claims were made, but it's just different now. I will point out, though, that his approval rating still lower than a George W. Bush, than a Barack Obama, than a Joe Biden being elected. So he's in a bit of a honeymoon period. And that is normal for Republican presidents, Democratic presidents when they're elected. But I think the rubber is going to hit the road when you start seeing him try to enact policies, whether that is, protectionist policies like tariffs that may drive up prices, and whether or not he can actually enact part of his agenda.
What I didn't hear as part of Tim's answer was just a rejection of Joe Biden and his policies and how that might have benefited Trump. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I see a lot of parallels here with Ronald Reagan, 85, and I think, people are talking about this a good bit, is not only was Trump the right man for this moment, but it's also a very big rejection of Joe Biden's presidency. Reagan came in with very popular ratings and also a mandate to change because of Jimmy Carter's failed policies during the time, very similar with the economy, with national security issues, with social justice. And I think Trump, too, the voters are looking at him for a drastic change. We see this in the polling, some of which you referenced. 60% want to see a change in government and the way that things operate. So I think he enters in with high approval ratings for his agenda. We know that mandates are short-lived, so he probably only has about 6 months of this kind of honeymoon, high popularity ratings before the rubber really hits the road, and he might see a dip in that. But I think he's got a long runway here to come in, high ratings on the transition, his nominees, et cetera, to get things done with Congress.
To Lauren's point, Tim, Biden's numbers are underwater. He's sitting at 40% favorability compared to 59% in 2020. And yet you have this sort of coalition of Democrats now pledging a resistance 2.0. We just heard this week about a group of former Biden officials or groups basically that are putting together resources to counter what it calls emerging threats. They've identified more than 200 emerging threats as it comes to the president's, incoming president's expected executive orders. Yeah. Could that backfire on Democrats?
Well, I think the American people are going to start at a place where they want to see Democrats and Republicans work together. I think that is true. I will also say to Lauren's point, look, the last election partially was in that same Fox News poll. A lot of people are saying that it is a referendum on the Biden administration versus a support of Trump. And that is never a place you want to be when you're running for re-election. So that's important to take into consideration. But I think for Democrats, it just depends on the issue, right? If the Trump administration comes in and wants to make healthcare less accessible, if they want to pass an abortion ban, if they take a hodgepodge of very unpopular policies from Project 2025 and try to pass them, I think it makes perfect sense for Democrats to fight that. If there are mass deportations, if DACA recipients are being threatened with deportation, if there are a whole host of policies that I think the American people would look at and say, we don't support that. And the majorities that Trump's been given, I mean, they're razor thin, right? It is razor thin in the House. Yes, he flipped the Senate, won by 1.4% in the popular vote. So does he have a huge mandate to enact Project 2025? No. And I think if that's the route that he goes, Democrats will do what they need to do to prevent that from being actualized.
Lauren, so much of this election came down to the economy. And we had Fox News polling that showed that over half of Americans believe that the Biden administration made the economy worse. You had the president in his final interview give somewhat of an odd explanation for why he invested in red states, saying that they really screwed up their economies. Yet we have this reporting to show that red states actually recovered from the pandemic better than some blue states. Do you think that we're seeing the president's age show more in his final days? Because that last interview he gave, as someone who follows him very, very closely, it was a little bit stunning to me. Even he speaks slower. You see his age wearing on him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we'll all always be grateful for Biden for his great public service and everything that he's given to this country over, half a decade in Washington, or longer than that, actually. But he is slowing down, and you see that. And I think that his goodbye tour, especially trying to create his legacy, is going to be fraught because, as he said himself, it's going to be decades before some of his policy impacts are really realized. But the one thing that is realized right now is inflation is worse because of the stimulus spending that he did during his term, and that was soundly rejected in this last election. So right now he is going to have a very hard time defending his legacy and his record. And I think that is what gives Trump such an opening to do something on the economy right out of the gate. He's talking a lot about immigration, energy, some of these other issues, tax cuts. He really does need to focus too on inflation and lowering costs for Americans, because the reason why red states' economies felt inflation so much worse is because they already had low prices, because red states have good economies. They have low prices compared to blue states. Blue states were able to absorb the inflationary impacts a little bit more so because they already have high prices. There's already greater regulation. It's already labor costs are already higher. Red states felt that greater. And so I think that, Trump needs to remember that as well. He's got a really important job here to get the economy back on track and prices back down.
Tim, it seems that there's been so much reporting about the president's age over the last couple of years, more after he dropped out of the race, obviously. But there was an interesting New York Times article with a quote from one of his closest advisors, Mike Donilon, saying the title of that article is "How Biden's Inner Circle Protected a Faltering President." And the quote from Donilon is, "Your biggest issue is the perception of age." Do you think that we were actually dealing with the perception of age or just plain old age?
Yeah. Well, this entire time, I think the truth has been that aging is not a conspiracy, right? It is not something that you can hide. It is just what it is. And we had an election with two candidates. We are two of the oldest candidates we've ever had for president of the United States, and that is what it is. That is the choice that we made. Now, obviously, we had Kamala Harris step in on the last 107 days, but that was the choice that Americans were given for a very long period of time. And I think we heard from voters that was not the choice that they wanted to make. But to Lauren's point, look, I think there is a lot in this farewell address that Biden gave that is about the seeds of his legacy that he has planted. And I think that was one of the difficulties in the election, too, is a lot of these projects that Democrats pushed, which are good projects, which is the CHIPS and Science Act and producing semiconductors, the infrastructure law, the 72,000 infrastructure projects that are going to be built around the country. It's hard to point to those with immediacy and make Americans feel the impact of how important those projects are. Those are things that happen down the road versus what you feel every single day is inflation, prices going up. And the Biden administration, I think at the beginning of the pandemic, was focused on job loss, rightfully so, had a historic record of 17 million jobs created. But at the end of the day, boil all of this down, I think it was the economy.
Yeah. But I also will say to that point, Democrats have a lot of rebuilding to do because of the brand damage that lying to the American people did about his age and telling everyone that they weren't seeing what they were seeing. Mm-hmm. And I think you're seeing that reflected greatly in the polls right now. I think that the Wall Street Journal had a poll out saying that it was like 12%, thought that Biden could go ahead. And so I think that's something that Democrats are going to have to claw back at.
I think I'll just say
the don't believe your lying eyes. I think everybody got tired of hearing that. But obviously 50 years in public service, grateful to the president for his contributions to the country. He's not done yet. He's got a couple days left, and we're hearing he might still even do some preemptive pardons. So we will watch and see what else he has in store for us. All right, Lauren Tomlinson, Tim Hogan, thank you very much for being here. Appreciate your time.